Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire supported by Glenlivet Books. The new variant of COVID-19 found in South Africa, christened by the World Health Organization Omicron B.1.1.1529, has terrified the world. It's said to be more infectious than other variants. It's possibly said to be more resistant to vaccines than other variants. And if that's true, it could be truly frightening. But the key question is it well established that these are the properties? Or is this a product of understandable exaggeration? With me to shed light on this critical question is one of India's top virologists, presently a senior fellow at Green Temple College in Oxford, Shahid Jamil. Professor Jamil, I want to talk to you about the new variant of COVID-19 discovered in South Africa, christened by the WHO Omicron or B.1.1.529. I'll come to details in a moment's time. But first, the BBC has been quoting scientists who've said it's horrific. Another scientist told the BBC this is the worst one yet. From what you know, are those correct descriptions, or is there an element of exaggeration in them?
So, Karan, again, good morning from here, and always a pleasure to be on your show. Yes, I think it's a bit of exaggeration, all the superlatives that are being used. What we do know is that this is a virus that has accumulated a large number of mutations, large number of changes. And people are speculating based on those numbers of changes. Let us get down to the basics. Viruses mutate all the time. This virus has undergone a lot of mutation. There are many variants. People have really lost track of variants. There are, however, three things that are critical for any variant, three questions that you must always ask. Is it more transmissible? Does it cause more severe disease? And will it evade pre-existing immunity that is conferred either through prior infection or through vaccination? Now, as far as transmissibility goes, there is some evidence now that this is spreading faster, but the data comes from a small cluster in one province of South Africa. It could be simply a cluster effect, but it could also be more widespread, and we need to keep our eye on that. As far as whether it causes more severe disease, it's too early to know that, because as you know, disease comes only several days after infection. So we'll have to wait and see if that's the case. The third thing is whether it will evade pre-existing immunity. Again, it's too early in the day to say that. I believe tests are going on in laboratories to at least see whether this particular virus is neutralized by the blood from vaccinated or priorly infected individuals. So I believe that over the next 3 to 4 weeks, things will become clearer. Yes, we should keep an eye on this, but using all those adjectives, I don't think is factual at this point, because everything is based on speculation.
I'm just going to repeat for the sake of the audience what you said, because I think it's going to be, in comparison to what we've been reading in papers and hearing on television, very reassuring. First of all, you said it's far too early to say whether this will cause or not cause severe disease. We have to wait at least a couple of weeks before we know. We simply don't know at the moment. Similarly, it's far too early to say if this variant will escape pre-existing immunity. It's far too early to know. Again, we have to wait. We simply don't know at the moment. And with regard to its more easy transmittability, you pointed out that this is simply based on data from one small cluster in one district of South Africa. Again, we need to wait to see what happens thereafter how quickly it spreads through the country as a whole before we come to a conclusion. Have I summarized that correctly? Because if I have, it would be
Yes,
very, very
yes, you
reassuring.
have. Yes, you have. Let me add just one more thing to the faster spread. There is also data now available from several other states in South Africa, several other regions in South Africa, which are based not on sequencing, but based on something called the S gene dropout, uh, which essentially means that when you do an RT-PCR test, you look for multiple genes in the virus to make sure that your test is accurate. So let's say you have 3 targets and the spike gene is one of those targets. Some tests have been shown to miss the spike gene, but the other 2 genes come positive. So those are called S gene dropout positive tests. Now, in those dropout cases, if you start sequencing, the rate of finding the Omicron is almost 100%. Okay, so now people are speculating that if you have a test that is S gene dropout, you can take it as an Omicron positive test. Of course, sequencing needs to be done. So based on that, there is more widespread presence of this in South Africa. So that's the factual situation at this point.
Just a moment. Are you now saying that based on RT-PCR tests, which themselves are based on the S gene dropout, we now have proof that this has spread much further in South Africa beyond that small one cluster? So, I mean, is there a contradiction in your position?
No, it's not a contradiction. It's not a contradiction. Sequencing has been done only from that one cluster. So we know for sure. Whereas, a surrogate marker is found a little more widely in South Africa. And in the past 1 week, the surge in this surrogate marker has been quite prominent in several of these regions in South Africa.
If I understand you correctly, you're saying in that one small cluster, genome sequencing has irrefutably established the presence of Omicron. But with regard to the rest of the country, the presence of Omicron is established on the basis of RT-PCR testing, in turn based on the S gene dropout. And therefore, we're not so sure. It may well be present, it may well have spread, but we don't know it with the same certainty as we do with regard to that cluster.
Yes. But we do know at this point that transmission, at least in that one region, has been quite phenomenal over the past 10 days or so.
So in which case, Professor Jamil, the impression you're now giving is very different to the impression you gave at the start in your first answer. In your first answer, you said that transmissions seem to be limited to one small cluster in one district. Now you're saying that on the basis of RT-PCR testing, transmission may be fairly widespread through the whole country.
Yes, it could be. My first answer was based on sequencing. We know for sure.
But on the basis of RT-PCR, it could be spread right through South Africa.
It's more widespread, and those samples are being sequenced. So we will know in a day or two.
So then your answer is not quite as reassuring as it was when I first heard it.
Well, yes. I mean, look, we need to keep an eye on this. It's an evolving situation. Okay. What I'm saying today may not be at all true tomorrow or the day after.
Let's come to details, because many of these details are also in the papers. They've been discussed on television, and people would like some understanding from you what these details mean. Professor De Oliveira, the director of the Center for Epidemic Response and Innovation in South Africa, has said to the BBC, this variant has 50 mutations overall, 30 of which are in the spike protein, and the spike protein is the area which most vaccines are designed to target. It's also the route the virus uses to enter the body. How worrying is it that 30 of those 50 mutations are on the spike protein?
Right. So again, what Professor De Oliveira said was information that was 2 days old. And that was based on 4 sequences, 3 from Botswana and 1 from Hong Kong, in a patient who went from South Africa to Hong Kong. Now, if you look at that information, there were 50 mutations, 32 were in the spike, and 18 were distributed in other genes. Now, based on sequencing of about 100 genomes of this lineage, there are, I don't remember the exact number, but possibly about 30 conserved mutations across the viral genome, out of which 10 are in a region of the spike protein that's relevant for entering cells and for neutralizing antibodies. So in the receptor binding domain and in something that we call the N-terminal domain. So that's the factual position now, with more sequences becoming available.
So does that mean that of the 32 mutations in the spike protein, you're saying 10 are the ones that really matter? And those 10
are right. So I'm not even sure whether all 32 mutations in the spike are present as a consensus in the 100 genomes. But there are 10 that are in the critical regions of the spike that are conserved across these 100 genomes.
These 10, are they the ones that Professor De Oliveira says are in what's called the receptor binding domain?
Yes, they are in the receptor binding domain and in something called the N-terminal domain, to which several neutralizing antibodies bind.
So these 10 are critical, not necessarily the other 20, which constitute a total of 30. Right. And the second thing you said, that of the 100 genome sequences done of this variant, it's not necessary that all those 100 had the 32. Some did, not all.
Yes. So I'm saying consensus is less than what was earlier known for 4 genomes.
Now, as you said, 10 of the mutations are in the receptor binding domain. These are the critical ones. These are the potentially worrying ones. It's said that the Delta variant only has 2 in this area. How significant is it that this South African variant has 8 more?
Yes, so it is again something to be concerned about, but at this point, data is not available whether these mutations are allowing the virus to escape antibody-based neutralization. It is likely that the efficacy of antibody or efficacy of vaccines would possibly go down a bit with this variant. To how much, we don't know, but whether vaccines will fail completely against this variant is highly unlikely.
That again is reassuring. It's possible, and I think the word was possible you use, not likely. It's possible that efficacy will go down a bit. We don't know how much, but it's very unlikely it will be eliminated altogether.
Yes. So let me also add another point here, which is related, and that is that there is no substitute for continued vaccination at scale everywhere, including Africa, which, WHO has been warning that the vaccination rates in Africa is very low. And we now see something coming out from there that's of concern. So this again reiterates the fact that vaccination at scale is very important. Access is important, equity is important.
Let me go back a step to when we were talking about transmissibility and what you said about the fact that if you go by RT-PCR tests, which go on the basis of the S gene dropout, then it's probably spread much more in South Africa, perhaps fairly widely. Professor Tom Wenzel-Lehr, who's a professor of biology and biostatistics at KU Leuven University, has said to the BBC that it's possible that this South African variant could have a 6-fold higher R value than Delta. Does whatever you know suggest that it could be as high as that?
Again, I would not fathom a guess here. R value is calculated based on the actual spread, actual speed of transmission. So I think all this is a speculation, whether it's 6 times or 2 times or 1.5 times, we don't know unless the data is there.
Okay, let me put something else to you, Professor Jamil. There is a theory, and I'm deliberately using the word theory because I don't know if it's a confirmed fact, that this variant appeared in a person who was immunocompromised, and as a result, the virus had a lot of opportunity to mutate in multiple ways and in multiple numbers. That's why it has so many as 50 mutations, possibly 30 in the spike protein, another 10 in the receptor binding or N-terminal domain. Do you think this theory could be credible?
Karan, it is plausible, but it's going to be very difficult to prove unless you nail down that person from where it originated. If you recall, similar hypothesis was made when the Kent variant appeared, which later became the Alpha variant from the UK. And it was thought that, in somebody who was immunocompromised, the virus persisted at low levels for long periods of time and underwent what we call adaptive evolution in the person. So it is very much possible that something like that happened. The other smoking gun here is that South Africa has one of the highest rates of HIV/AIDS infected people in the world. So could it have infected somebody who has uncontrolled HIV/AIDS and persisted in that person and transmitted from that person? Plausible, but again, going to be very difficult to prove. The other hypothesis is that this virus may have evolved for about a year in an animal reservoir, and this may be another jump from an animal to a human. Again, a hypothesis, something that's as plausible but very difficult to prove.
So this could have what they call zoonotic origin, a jump from
it
animal
could be
to human.
It could be, yes. So we haven't even nailed down the first zoonotic transfer yet. So you can see how difficult that situation is.
Now, some reports suggest, I'm quoting Reuters, that one of the good news elements, if good news is the correct phrase, is that this virus can be detected by an RT-PCR test. And that's what you were talking about when you talked about the S gene dropout. How accurate is that RT-PCR detection?
Well, firstly, a lot of testing that is happening around the world now does not use the S gene as a target, or uses regions of the S gene that don't change that much, and that is really to avoid sensitive detection. So we are sort of in a difficult situation now. Most of the world actually doesn't use tests which will point out to this dropout. It just so happened that some older tests are using it, and those were being used in South Africa, and they noticed this.
So you're saying that only RT-PCR tests that detect the S gene dropout will be able to detect Omicron on the RT-PCR testing basis. Only those specific tests, not all RT-PCR tests.
Yes, not all RT-PCR tests. And I'm also saying that would not be a 100% confirmation that it is Omicron. So the right way to do it is, if you have any test that fails the S gene, then that should be sequenced to find out what variant it is.
But the important thing is saying that it's not all RT-PCR tests that can pick up the Omicron variant. It is specifically those that detect the S gene fallout. Luckily, those were being used in South Africa, but in many other countries, that version of RT-PCR is not being used. And secondly, you're saying, even after RT-PCR has picked it up, it's not 100% guaranteed it's picked it up correctly. You do need genome sequencing for proper confirmation.
Yes, absolutely.
But coming to the end of this interview, Professor Jimmy, let me ask you one or two quick questions. From everything you know, do you agree with the belief that Omicron, B.1.1.529, is more worrying than Beta and Delta?
No, it is certainly worrying. The number of mutations that this virus has accumulated in it should be cause for worry. What I'm simply trying to say is that let us not be guided by emotion here. Let us be guided by data, and we'll have to wait for that data. So jumping the gun right now to say that vaccines are going to fail, or the virus is 6 times more infectious than Delta, all those are speculations. We have no data on that, and I am a firm believer in data. Let's get that data. But on the other hand, let us also be vigilant, because one might argue that by the time data comes, if it is highly transmissible, it would have already transmitted to a lot of places.
So we need to wait for data, but we have to be careful already.
Yeah, we have to be careful. We have to continue to wear masks. Countries have already started.
Can I stop you there? You're coming on to the precise question I want to ask, which is why I stopped.
Okay.
You're talking about the need to be careful. And I want to ask you, what steps should the Indian government take? You know Indian conditions, even though you're in Oxford at the moment, you know them like the back of your hand. So what steps should the Indian government take? So far, tighter screening of passengers from South Africa and other countries where Omicron is present has been instituted. But is that sufficient? Should India also do what Britain and many European countries have done, which is to stop flights from South Africa and other countries where Omicron is present?
No, I think, again, that's more of an emotional response. I think increased security, increased surveillance. I'll tell you an incident that a friend of mine sent to me on WhatsApp yesterday. He was traveling from Hyderabad to Bhubaneswar. And he said that at Hyderabad airport, there were 2 guys who came and sat in front of him. They did not have masks on at the airport. And he asked them where they're from. And they said that they are from South Africa and they have come to Goa for the film festival. Now, this tells you a lot. My friend was rather paranoid about it. There were people who are still, running around in airports without wearing masks. So the point is, we need to be all very vigilant. As far as the immigration authorities are concerned, just limiting flights from South Africa, what does it give you? I mean, all flights to India from South Africa are not direct flights. People come through Dubai, people come through Qatar. Somebody must have been in South Africa, went somewhere else and came to India. So how will you figure that out? I think it's very important to just be vigilant. And
but what you're saying is very important. You're saying 2 things. Stopping all flights from South Africa would be an emotional response. There are many ways people can come from South Africa because they take indirect flights via Qatar or Doha or Dubai. But the second thing you said was about the friend of yours who contacted you. Sitting in front of him at Bhubaneswar, 2 people who'd come from South Africa who weren't wearing masks. But that suggests that the so-called screening that was supposed to have been enhanced yesterday is not working effectively. Because this happened yesterday, and 2 people from South Africa were sitting in front of him without a mask. So the screening the government claims is happening is not happening effectively.
Either that, or it's not being communicated very well to people that, look, there is a threat. And it's also very irresponsible for these 2 gentlemen who...
Absolutely. But one would imagine that yesterday, people who've come from South Africa would be screened. The government would do tests to make sure that they don't have the thing. From what you're saying, that doesn't seem to have happened.
Well, we know our system.
Absolutely. My last question. In the context of the fear, not the certainty, but the fear that Omicron could be more infectious, more easily transmissible, and perhaps it is also more capable of evading vaccines. Is there a need for the government to change its attitude to boosters and give them to people over 60, to people with comorbidities, and to those healthline workers who are at the front of possible infection? Just those three categories. Is there a need to change policy and give them boosters?
The answer is more nuanced. It's not going to be black and white, because like everything in public health and medicine, it's about risk and benefit. If there was unlimited vaccine available and we had a capacity to vaccinate, let's say, 10 million people, 15 million people a day, and we have unlimited vaccine, I would say, yes, go ahead and do that. But if vaccine is limited, if your ability to put the vaccine into people is limited, then you focus on getting as many people 2 doses as possible
Can I
before
interrupt
you
that point?
start to boosters.
Can I interrupt at that point? Professor Jameel, it's now well established that quantity of vaccine is no longer a limitation. The Serum Institute alone is making around 240 million vaccine jabs a month. In fact, Serum has begun exporting. Secondly, newspapers are reporting that there are very sizable quantities of vaccines, perhaps about 100 million, unused, sitting with states. The vaccine rate is the problem. It's nowhere near sufficient to guarantee we'll vaccinate fully every adult before the end of the year, but that also may be because hesitancy is setting in. After 83% single jabs, hesitancy was always likely to set in. In those circumstances where you clearly have enough vaccines, and hesitancy is one of the reasons why the vaccine rate is slowing down. There are others as well, I'm not denying it. Should we consider boosters for the over 60s and those with comorbidities, given that there is this fear of Omicron?
Well, we shouldn't do it for the fear of Omicron. We should, because that's a fear that's at this point is an unconfirmed fear.
But what's your answer? Should we give boosters, yes or no?
We should give boosters only after we have covered people with 2 doses, as many as we can. And then when we give boosters, we should prioritize people in the high-risk group, people who are above 60, people who are in the healthcare work business, all of that.
So you're saying this is not the time for India to start giving boosters?
Again, giving boosters, just now with the fear of Omicron is simply an emotional knee-jerk reaction. I was told by a friend that in Delhi, in the Yamuna Pushta area, the slum areas, there is a lot of vaccination going on since the Omicron came about, and some of it is forced vaccination. Now, those things have never helped in pandemic situations, and we need to be careful.
Okay, that's very. I think it's clear, and I'm just repeating it. Giving boosters because of fear of Omicron to any age group would be only an emotional knee-jerk reaction. First, we must complete giving double jabs to everyone, then think of it. Is that a correct summary of your position?
And I would also like to see. I should also like to see some data from India.
But first, tell me, sir, is that a correct summary of your position?
Yes,
before we slide off to something else?
It is. And all I'm saying is, our response should not be emotionally driven; it should be data driven.
Okay, sir.
We have studies from India. Do we have studies from India that tell us how protection from severe disease falls with time in different age groups? I have not seen that data publicly available.
I'll give you the answer to that. Gagandeep Kang raised this very issue with me in an interview 3 days ago. She said there is no evidence available in public about how protection from vaccine against serious disease and hospitalization diminishes after 6 months. And that's because she believes we are not tracking hospitalization of people with COVID over the age of 60. If that data, she says, is available with the government, we don't know, but it's certainly not available to her. And she is, as you know, a member of the COVID working group. that answers your question. I thank you for this interview, and in particular, I thank you for your general reassurance. There is a lot of exaggeration, you said, in the superlatives being used to describe Omicron when it's being called horrific, the worst one yet. Exaggeration in terms of the fear of how fast and how quickly it may spread. Although, if you go by the RT-PCR basis, perhaps that exaggeration is not as exaggerated as it seems. But certainly there is exaggeration about the fear that it will evade immunity. We just don't know. We have to wait and see. And there is exaggeration about the fear that it will create severe disease. Again, we just don't know. We have to wait and see. Thank you very much, Professor Jamil. Take care.
Thank you, Karan.
Stay safe.
Thank you.